There was a time when humanity didn't live in cities, didn't write, didn't measure time, didn't build anything meant to last. No laws, no history, no system to remember anything beyond a single lifetime. And then something changed. Somewhere between two wild rivers, in a land where floods could erase entire villages overnight, a group of people did something no one had ever done before. They didn't just survive, they organized the world. They created systems to control nature, to manage people, to store knowledge, and to build something far bigger than themselves. Cities, writing, laws, time itself. But here's the strange part. For thousands of years, no one even knew they existed. Their cities turned to dust. Their language was forgotten. Their story completely erased until we found them again. This is the story of the Sumerians, the forgotten civilization that built the foundation of the modern world and then vanished. To understand the Sumerians, you have to understand the land that shaped them. Southern Mesopotamia, a flat open plain between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. At first glance, it looks like a place full of life, but it wasn't. There were no forests for wood, no mountains for stone, no metals beneath the ground. Just endless mud, scorching heat, and two unpredictable rivers. When the rains came, they didn't nurture the land, they destroyed it. Floods arrived without warning, drowning crops, wiping out homes, reshaping the landscape overnight. And when the waters disappeared, they left behind dry, cracked earth, a cycle of chaos, too much water, or none at all. By every natural law, this land should have rejected civilization, and yet, this is exactly where it began. Because beneath all that destruction, the rivers left something incredibly valuable, rich, fertile soil. The kind of soil that could grow anything, if only it could be controlled. And that single challenge would change human history forever. But before the Sumerians rose, they were not alone. Long before cities, before writing, before history itself, other people lived here. Small farming communities, building simple homes from mud, digging the first irrigation ditches, shaping clay into pottery. They understood the land, but they never transformed it. Then, sometime around 4000 BCE, a new people appeared. We don't know where they came from. Their language doesn't match any other on earth. It has no relatives, no clear origin. Even the names of the rivers, the cities, the land itself weren't theirs. They borrowed them. It's as if they arrived, stepped into an existing world, and then quietly began to change everything. According to their own stories, they came from a distant paradise, an island called Dilmun, a place of purity, untouched by death or disease. Was it real or just a myth, created to explain the unexplainable? We still don't know. And maybe that's what makes them even more fascinating, because the people who would go on to build the first civilization in human history arrived from nowhere. And then they made a decision that would change everything. In most places, when nature is hostile, people move, they leave, they search for easier land. But the Sumerians didn't. They stayed and chose to fight the environment itself. To survive here, farming wasn't enough. You couldn't just plant seeds and wait. You had to control water. So they began digging canals, cutting through miles of earth. They built dikes to hold back floods, reservoirs to store water, channels to guide it exactly where it was needed. This wasn't small-scale work. It required thousands of people working together with perfect timing. If even one part failed, the entire system collapsed. Fields would dry out or drown, and for the first time in human history, survival depended not on individuals, but on coordination. on organization, on systems. And from that need, something entirely new emerged. Not a tribe, not a village, but a city. The first true cities began to rise, slowly at first, then all at once. What were once small settlements turned into dense urban centers. The greatest of them was Uruk, tens of thousands of people living together within walls, in a space smaller than a modern city district. For most of human history, people lived in groups of 20, maybe 50. Now, they were surrounded by strangers. You no longer knew everyone. You couldn't rely on memory or trust or personal relationships. And that changed everything. Because when a society becomes too large, something breaks. You can't remember who owes what. You can't track resources. You can't manage labor. And when memory fails, you need something else. That's when the Sumerians created one of the most powerful tools in human history. Not for art, not for stories, but for control. Writing. At first, writing didn't look like language at all. There were no letters, no sentences, no stories, just small clay tokens, each one representing something real. A sheep, a sack of grain, a unit of labor. If you had 10 sheep, you had 10 tokens. Simple. But as cities grew, this system began to fail. Too many goods, too many people, too many transactions to keep track of. So someone had an idea. Instead of storing the tokens, why not press them into clay? Make a mark instead of keeping the object. It was a small change, but it changed everything. Because for the first time, information could exist outside the human mind. The marks became drawings, the drawings became symbols, and over time, those symbols began to represent not just things, but sounds, language, captured in clay. Writing wasn't born from creativity. It was born from necessity, from the need to remember what no human could remember alone. Once writing existed, everything changed. For the first time in history, information didn't disappear when a person died. It stayed, recorded, stored, unchangeable. Debts could no longer be denied. Taxes could be tracked. Orders could be enforced. And with that, power began to shift. At the center of every Sumerian city stood a massive structure, rising above the flatland like a man-made mountain, the ziggurat. It wasn't just a temple. It was the heart of the entire system. Inside, priests controlled grain, labor, land, and records. They decided who worked, who received food, who owed what. In their world, everything belonged to the gods, and the priests spoke for them. But as cities grew larger and conflicts more frequent, another kind of power began to rise, not from religion, but from force. Kings. At first, these kings were not permanent rulers. They were chosen only in times of crisis, when war threatened the city. A temporary leader, a protector. But power, once given, rarely goes away. Over time, these leaders stayed. They built armies. They claimed authority, not just in war, but in peace. And slowly, leadership changed from shared responsibility to absolute rule. Each city became its own world. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish, each with its own king, its own army, its own god. And between them, constant conflict. Alliances formed, then broke. Wars were fought, cities were conquered, then lost again. There was no unity, only competition. But out of that chaos, one man would do something no one had done before. He wouldn't just conquer a city, he would try to control all of them. His name was Sargon. No one knows exactly where Sargon came from. His story begins like a myth. A child, placed in a basket, set adrift on a river, found, raised, and brought into the service of a king. But somewhere along the way, something changed. The servant became a ruler, and the ruler became a conqueror. Sargon didn't fight like the kings before him. He didn't just attack neighboring cities, take their wealth, and leave. He stayed. He built something new, an empire. For the first time in history, multiple cities, multiple cultures, multiple peoples were brought under a single rule. His armies moved across Mesopotamia, then beyond it, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. A scale of power the world had never seen before. But conquest alone wasn't enough, because controlling land is not the same as controlling people. And Sargon understood that. So he didn't just use force. He used systems. He placed governors in every major city, stationed soldiers to maintain control, standardized administration, taxes, communication. For the first time, power wasn't local, it was centralized, a single system, managing an entire region. But even then, there was a problem. The empire spoke different languages, followed different gods, lived by different traditions. You can conquer people with an army, but you can't unify them with force alone. And this is where something remarkable happened. Sargon didn't just rely on generals, he turned to culture, to belief, to identity. His own daughter was placed in one of the most powerful religious positions in the land, and through her, something entirely new emerged. Not politics, not war, but a voice, a personal voice, one that would change history in a completely different way. Her name was Enheduanna. And she did something no one before her had ever done. She wrote and signed her name. Before this, writing was used for records, for trade, for administration, cold, functional, impersonal. But Enheduanna changed that. She wrote about herself, her fears, her exile, her devotion, her pain. For the first time in history, a human voice spoke directly across time, not as a king, not as a priest, but as an individual. And through her words, something new was born, not just literature, but identity, the idea that a single person's thoughts mattered enough to be recorded and preserved. But while culture was evolving, the empire itself was beginning to crack, because every system, no matter how powerful, carries within it the seeds of its own collapse. The problems didn't appear all at once. They built slowly, quietly, beneath the surface. The same irrigation systems that once gave life began to damage the land. Salt built up in the soil, crops started to fail, food became scarce. At the same time, the empire grew too large to manage easily. Corruption spread, control weakened, and beyond the borders, new threats were rising. From the mountains to the east came invading groups who didn't understand the delicate systems that kept the land alive. They didn't maintain the canals, they didn't manage the water, and without those systems, everything began to break. Fields dried up, cities emptied, trade collapsed. The structure that had taken centuries to build started to fall apart, not in a single moment, but piece by piece, until finally, the great Sumerian cities were no longer able to stand. One by one, the cities fell silent. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, places that once held tens of thousands, now empty, temples abandoned, canals filled with silt, walls slowly crumbling back into the earth. And then, something even stranger happened. They weren't remembered. Other civilizations rose, empires expanded, histories were written, but the Sumerians disappeared from human memory completely. Their language was no longer spoken. Their names were no longer known. Their achievements attributed to no one. For thousands of years, they were gone, not just destroyed, forgotten, until In the 1800s, archaeologists began digging into the deserts of Mesopotamia and uncovered clay tablets, thousands of them, covered in strange markings, a language older than anything known, and slowly, piece by piece, the first civilization in human history was rediscovered. And when we finally understood what they had left behind, it changed how we see the world. Because the things we consider normal today, the structure of time, the idea of cities, systems of law, writing itself, all of it traces back to them. Every time you check the clock, divide an hour, write a sentence, or live inside an organized society, you are using something they created, a civilization that built the foundation of human life and then vanished so completely that we lived inside their inventions for thousands of years without knowing their name. Empires rise and fall. Cities are built and destroyed. People are remembered and forgotten. But ideas don't disappear. They survive long after the people who created them are gone. And in that way, the Sumerians never truly vanished. They're still here, in the structure of your world. If you've made it this far, you're already part of a very small group of people who don't just watch history. You understand it. And if this story made you see the world a little differently, hit like and subscribe. Because there are more stories like this, hidden civilizations, forgotten empires, and moments that shaped everything around you, without you even realizing it. We're uncovering them one by one. And if you want to go even deeper, support the channel, join the journey, and help bring these stories to life. Because history isn't just the past, it's the system you're living in right now. And once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it.